Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Art of Cybersecurity with me, Chirag Joshi. When I started creating this series, I had a couple of purposes. The first one was I wanted to talk to practitioners and experts in the field. And the second was to touch upon topics which were typically not covered in the traditional forms of cyber reporting and the other forms of cyber tracking that we see these days. So, a topic along those lines was cybersecurity journalism. This topic has always fascinated me and has become so much more prominent because there is a wide range of interest from people in this topic. But also on the other side, you have folks who try to gain notoriety through claiming things that they may or may not have done. And when I started thinking about the topic, the person who came to my mind to speak with, I'm so delighted I have him today, Brian Pereira. Uh, if I start reading Brian's bio, it'll take the full show, so I won't. But I want to say a few things. The first thing is he's highly experienced. He's worked with some of the biggest names you can imagine in the media industry and journalism. He started as a business technology editor. He's worked with Times of India, Indian Express, amongst others. And over the years, now he actually runs his own journalism website as well as a podcast. So he does a lot of different things. And I like talking to Brian because he is somebody who also understands cyber very well. He tries to learn about it more and more as a practitioner and has certifications to back that up. So it's pretty amazing combination of a journalist who's gone out and gained all these skills. So Brian, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you, Chirag. Thanks for having me. I'm truly honored.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So, Brian, maybe we kick off with I've just given a small snippet of your experience. So, hand over to you. Just give a bit of a background to the audience about yourself. And then also, how did you get into cybersecurity journalism?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I'm asked that question all the time. So, Chirag, before I get into it, just a small disclaimer that everything I mentioned today these are all personal views and should not be attributed back to my present company. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. So today I work for a company called the Information Security Media Group. Actually, that's my day job, and it's about cybersecurity journalism, and I'll tell you more about that in a bit. On the sidelines, and when I go home and on weekends, I run another platform called Digital Creed. So that's my own. I wouldn't say it's a blogging site now because I do a whole lot of things there, like what you mentioned, podcast and video interviews and so on. So I call that a digital journalism platform. Okay, so these are the two things that I do. Now the question is, how do I get into cybersecurity journalism? Actually, quite by accident. I've always been with business technology journalism for the longest time. In fact, since 1994, and in somewhere in between, I was doing the consumer space with Chip magazine.
Right.
You may have heard of Chip. Reviewing phones and reviewing graphics cards and more of the consumer technologies. And then I started moving towards the enterprise side. So 3 years ago, I got a call from the EC Council, which is a leader in cybersecurity training and certification. And actually, it was a friend there, because he was working with me at a previous company. And EC Council said that, look, we are in training and all that and certification, and we have this franchisee network of training companies, but we want to start a media arm. So we want you to kind of lead this editorial team. And we have this media property called CISOMag or CISOMag. We'd like you to join here and recruit a team of people in India and report on cybersecurity news every day. So we set up the CISOMag website, which is still there today. And we had journalists in Hyderabad and Mumbai, a small team of 3 or 4 people, and we were producing news every day on cybersecurity. There's so much happening, Chirag, in cybersecurity. There's never a shortage of news. So we never had to really go out and hunt for ideas. That was 3 years ago, 2019, 2020, around that time. And as I got into cybersecurity journalism, I was very intrigued to learn more about cybersecurity, right? But I felt that I also needed some kind of structured process to learn, some formal education. And then eventually I was yearning for some certification, and we'll come to that in a bit, why I went in for certification. But as I got into certification, I actually began to understand cybersecurity at a very deeper level. I did a foundational certification from the EC Council, and I now aspire to do further, certifications, just because I'm so curious to learn more and more, just like you. And that's how I got into cybersecurity journalism.
No, it's really good, and it's good to see your kind of the breadth of your experience as well, that comes with it. And to be honest, I mean, as I'm currently in Sydney, Australia, and one of the the headline stories these days in cybersecurity has been the Optus data breach, which has been massive in terms of its scope. And look, when I reflect on it, quality reporting plays such a big role when incidents like this happen. It's not rushing to place blame, it's not creating fear. People are generally anxious when things like this happen, and I think good quality reporting that gives people a sense of confidence, that is tracking the events in a more verified manner, is such a powerful thing. And I feel that the role of cybersecurity journalism is very vital and has to keep evolving as cyber threats evolve, as we as cyber practitioners and leaders evolve. I think along with that, journalism is going to become a key factor, because more and more regular folks who were typically not tuned into cybersecurity now are. Like, the documentaries on the topic. It's from boardrooms to living rooms. Like I say, it's everywhere. So no, it's really important. So I guess on that one, I do want to ask you, because yeah, I imagine a lot of listeners would also like to understand, when you think about cybersecurity journalism, how does it differ from traditional journalism? Is there a distinction? If so, what is it?
That's another good question, Chirag. Well, there is a similarity and there is a difference. Okay, so let me talk about the similarity first. The similarity between cybersecurity journalism and mainstream journalism is that the reporting the way you go about doing your research, your reporting, and your writing, all the same journalism principles apply. You're taught in journalism school how to write a headline, how to write a lead. In the lead paragraph, you're going to write the 5 W's and the H, the how. And then we are taught how to structure and how to do the flow of the story. So those principles apply in cybersecurity journalism as well. So that's the similarity in the way you research. Of course, today, I don't do print journalism anymore like I used to do 20 years ago when I was in magazines. But as we got to online and online journalism, we don't really do the reporting the way, how you see in the detective movies, in the old Hollywood movies. The reporters would actually go knocking doors and, a big tape recorder, and doing interviews and trying to collect bits of information that way, feet on the street. So today, digital journalism is different. We don't do that. We get all our leads from various sources online, and I'll talk to you in a bit about it. So that's where the similarity ends. Now, the difference is cybersecurity journalism is journalism plus something else. That is, it gets more specific to the domain. That is, you have to understand cybersecurity. You have to understand the jargon. You have to know, the websites to go to get the leads. You have to follow cybersecurity influencers. So cybersecurity journalism is about reporting the breaches, data breaches, the attacks, how they impact organizations, how organizations are recovering. When you talk about ransomware, we investigate, did the organization pay the ransomware? Why were they compelled to do that? Or if they refuse to pay the ransomware? So it really is very focused towards cybersecurity, just as you have beats today. In a mainstream newspaper, I used to work for the Times of India. You have a crime reporter, you have an aviation journalist, and today you also have a cybersecurity journalist who only covers. So those are called beats. So I would say cybersecurity journalism is really about the beat and getting very specific and narrowing it down to only cybercrime and maybe even fraud. And then you can also talk on the enterprise side. But again, there are areas, diversified areas. You can go towards consumer reporting, people getting hacked on their mobile phones these days, senior citizens losing money.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of another branch of cybersecurity journalism. And then you have other things like forensics and so on. So within cybersecurity journalism itself, there are a lot of branches. But I think that is what cybersecurity journalism is all about. Sure.
It's quite remarkable when I think about like you mentioned the commonalities and the distinction, and when you mentioned the beat, and now there is a cybersecurity beat. I think that is quite I would imagine that's quite an evolution. Like I don't correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think 20 years back you would have that specific beat called cybersecurity when it
Oh,
comes to
no, no,
journalism.
no. 20 years back, there was no cybersecurity.
That is
Chirag,
right.
20 years back, I just had to deal with a virus on a floppy and maybe a worm on a network. The I love you virus and the worms on
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
network.
How
That
times
was it. That was it. There was no
have
cybersecurity.
Yeah, and that's I think as our world gets increasingly reliant on technology, powered by technology, I mean, this is just an offshoot of that. I think cyber typically crime follows where there is money and where there is
Correct.
commerce, and it's no surprise. But it also, when I think about cyber threats, the nation state aspect of it, because of our reliance on technology and convergence of physical cyber systems, I think you're starting to see that play out, where you see nation states involved for espionage, for advantages in warlike situations, diplomacy, and so much more. So it's definitely a very fast moving field. But the one thing which did catch my attention was the leads aspect of it and sources aspect of it, because you mentioned that as part of journalism, that is just what you learn. So I'm keen to see when it comes to cybersecurity, like what is your approach to get the right sources, the right leads for the breaking news, but along with that, verifying the authenticity of the sources you're dealing with. How do you go about that? That's very fascinating to me, that whole journey.
Okay. So that's actually two questions in one. Let me take up the first part, Chirag. So, now I'm just retracing a few steps back. When you talk about news, or when you talk about journalism, again, there are different types of journalism. There is, as you see on the television channels, there's breaking news. So, breaking news is immediate. It's about speed, it's about time to market. Something happened, what happened, how did it happen, where did it happen? That's it. Okay? You just want to report it before everyone else. That's breaking news. You don't have much time. Okay, so when I was working in an editorial team, people have a few hours and they're working in different time zones. So that's not too much of time to just break it. But there's something called a second day lead, wherein you put a few more hours and talk to experts, practitioners, and then it becomes a little longer story. And similarly, the BBC and others have something called analysis, news analysis. So after breaking news, you have second day lead, which is a longer story with more inputs from people. And then you also have analysis where the journalist can actually break it down and analyze it, but he has to really know a great deal about that topic. And then you have features. Features are you could take your time, it's not time bound. You talk to a lot more people, do a lot more research. So now we're really talking about the research, Chirag, and we don't like the old days of journalism. Like when I started in the 90s, we used to work the phones, as they say, calling people, going and meeting people, taking a tape recorder along, dictaphone as we called it, then coming back, transcribing it. Oh, that was painful, transcribing. Took me hours for each interview. Today, everything is online. In what I do, at least in the online journalism. Okay, and so you asked me a question about the sources. Now we have to for there is a lot of information online. You won't believe that you'll be overwhelmed with information.
Mm, mm,
And unless you are pretty organized, pretty well structured, and I'll tell you how I do it, you will not be able to track it all. Okay, so I'll just give you the sources first. There are various cybersecurity websites. You've probably heard of Bleeping Computer, Dark Reading, and so on. The Hacker News. Many websites are there. We can go to those websites and get the news from there. Bleeping is pretty fast. Bleeping Computer, they are very early with the news, and so we also look at all these websites to get the leads. Okay. Apart from that, there are blogs by both cybersecurity journalists, influencers, people like you who would write blogs, and then also by the companies, the big tech companies. Now I call them big tech because they're not security companies. If you take Microsoft and Google, They also have security divisions within that company. Okay, Microsoft has cloud, Amazon has cloud, but they've also got security divisions. Now, those are called the security research and threat intelligence divisions, which produce very good blogs. So we follow the Microsoft security blog, the Google threat analysis group, Google tag. Kaspersky has a good blog. Checkpoint has a good blog. And then there are people like Brian Krebs, a
Yes.
security journalist, Kim Zetter, Kathleen Simpanu. And each of these magazines also has cybersecurity journalists like CNET, ZDNet. So we follow these journalists also. They have their own blogs. The next place we could go to is Twitter. Twitter is very important. We follow a lot of cybersecurity influencers, cybersecurity practitioners, even former hackers. Like may have heard of Maiko Hyponen. You may have heard of this guy who did Troy Hunt. Have I been pawned? So we follow all these people. Third is we also look at other sources like Telegram. Telegram is very important these days, especially since we report on the Ukraine Russia war and the cyber attacks linked with that. So a lot of them come on Telegram and they have private groups. So we try to join these groups to get our leads, and that's very, very important because it's you get the leads. The richer leads are on Telegram than Twitter, because on Twitter everyone comments on anything and you don't know what is authentic and who's credible. But on Telegram, it's kind of very focused because you have focused groups. Of course, there are others like Reddit, LinkedIn to some extent, and then there are other social media websites like Medium and so on. Then there are the mainstream newspapers. Even newspapers, mainstream newspapers in India today are reporting about cybersecurity.
Right.
Hindustan Times, Midday Times of India, and they have cybercrime journalists reporting on that. So I also read the print newspapers. I buy those and I read those, or I read it on the app. And then there are others, incumbents like Reuters, Bloomberg, Financial Financial Times, who have been there for years and years. They're also reporting on cybersecurity. Now, the thing is, when there's so much to follow, you need to have a systematic way of doing it. You can't really type 50 URLs every day in your browser and go to 50 sites. So I personally use something called an RSS reader, and the one I use is called Feedly. So I subscribe to the cybersecurity feed, and there's the free version and the paid version. So I've taken the paid version because I invest in myself and I buy tools for myself, and I get all the cybersecurity websites there because I've taken the cybersecurity package in Feedly. But I also add to that whenever I find a new website, I can just add an RSS link there, and it adds to that list of sites. The other thing that you want to do is for Twitter, you want to create columns. So for that, you need to use Tweetdeck. Tweetdeck is another utility, in case you haven't heard of it, but it's very well integrated with Twitter. So you can start your Tweetdeck app. It's all online. You don't have to install anything on your PC. And then you create columns for each. Like I've created one for cybersecurity influencers. I've created one for cybersecurity news.
Right.
And so one for Microsoft, one for Google. And I can just track the individual feeds there. So that's how I organize myself. The third thing I do is I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. And I don't read them all because there are too many. Sometimes I need to unsubscribe. And I feel guilty because I subscribe to so many and I read very few. But I look at the subject lines and I look at the headlines in the newsletters which hit my inbox every day. And the ones that strike me, there are some really good ones like from Sophos, Kaspersky, and so on. Sophos has got something called I think it's called the Naked Security blog, which is a very good blog. And I kind of know them now because I look at them every day. So if you're that systematic and that organized and you use these tools like RSS feed reader or TweetDeck, etc., you will be able to kind of track it all. But then again, there's a lot to track and a lot to keep up with. So I always tell my folks, people in my team, cybersecurity journalism is not a 9 to 5 job, because even at 11 o'clock in the night, they are tracking on their phone on Telegram, and the phone suddenly beeps with some alerts. They've set up some alerts. Oh my God, something has broken. Go back to the computer and start writing the story before everyone, because it's about being the first to break it out. So it's not an easy thing to do. And you really have to have as they say in the olden days, you have to have a nose for news. You have to have a passion to do this kind of work, because it's really a 24-hour job you're looking out. Okay. One more source that I have is there are threat intelligence groups. some of them are paid. They give you very good threat intelligence reports.
Right.
Like there is one in Singapore called Group IB, and I made friends with them, and they kind of send me all their threat reports. Then I made a lot of friends with the PR community, public relations agencies, and they also like send me reports. And then I go to these websites like CrowdStrike, attend a webinar, and subscribe for the newsletter. So automatically I get all the CrowdStrike reports every week, and they are very good reports, very in-depth. They're not promoting products or anything. Subtly they may, but they give you very good threat intelligence. Now, threat intelligence, as you know, is very important. In SOC, Security Operations Center, also provides that MSSPs as a paid service to companies. So this information is really invaluable. We really have to go to very rare sources to get this information. A mainstream reporter doesn't do this kind of thing, Chirag. Of course, but they have their good network. And of course, networking is also very important. We
Yeah.
need to have our sources of people who come to for quotes. Like I need to talk to somebody for quotes. I probably come to you tomorrow. What do you think of the Optus event in Australia, Chirag?
Yeah.
And then I would add your quote in my story. And recently it was Telstra, right? A few days back, which
Yeah.
also got it. Yeah. So what was the other part of your question? Credibility, I think it
Yeah.
was.
So firstly, it's pretty awesome to get a rundown of all the different things, all the different sources you have to follow. Because, and to the listeners, and well, just listening to you here is, I work in the field. I'm involved. I would like to think I stay up to date. At the same time, just the speed at which things change. To your point, I think that's such an important point. So I really hope just that aspect of what you just mentioned might be invaluable to our audience, all the
Yeah.
sources and just organizing them and synthesizing them. So that's awesome on terms of how you approach. Now, with all of these, right, a lot of names which you gave, in fact, most of them are very credible. But once in a while, I'm imagining on these Telegram groups and others, how do you get that authenticity? Because a big problem we have right now is, people trying to seek notoriety. You have the issue of fake news, of disinformation, which is always a challenge. So how do you navigate that delicate aspect?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I didn't know how to do this a few months back, but we had some internal training. And I also give you one more source for those who are listening out there. You can do the Reuters digital journalism course. It is free.
Okay.
And one module, it's just a few hours. You could complete it in 2 hours or less. They're very short modules. But one of the modules was about verification of sources. So I'd like to actually go back to that course and tell you what I learned there.
Wow.
Social media is a very open media, and like you mentioned, anyone can post anything, whatever. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry can post their comments, and even qualified people these days post a lot of nonsense. Even cybersecurity influencers stop believing in them as I used to believe before. They comment about each and everything, including the color of someone's shoes. So. So the Reuters digital journalism course taught me how to do this verification. Okay, and we recently had an incident a few months back. There are people who kind of jump the gun, want to create sensationalism. They have their own motives, and so they start posting things on Twitter. Now we've had this training that look, you may have got a very exciting lead. Someone has posted something on Twitter. How are you going to check the authenticity? So you got to go back and check this guy. How long has he been posting on social media? Okay, where all has he been quoted before? In which other media has quoted him? So you're trying to get his profile. You go on LinkedIn and check. Now it's difficult because these people don't use their real names. They use names like Gossi the dog, for example, and he's a cybersecurity. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, yeah. But then when you go through his activity, his feed, you look at all his posts, and then you kind of build a profile around him, and maybe try to find him on LinkedIn. Okay, some of our reporters have actually talked to actual hackers. Like for the Optus story, my colleague Jeremy Kirk was actually talking to the guy who was claiming the ransom threat, the ransomware for leaking the records, and then he changed his mind a few hours later. And because he had that advantage, the competing newspapers started calling Jeremy. And that is the irony of it. They don't usually do that because there's a lot of competition among journalists. Then the television people landed up as his doorstep. So Jeremy was giving interviews to the television crew because he broke the story and he did it so deep. in depth. He was actually talking to the hackers and trying to, in a way, negotiate with the hackers. Why are you doing this? It's not the right thing to do. Why don't you do this? So in a way, kind of being a catalyst in the whole thing. That is going beyond journalism.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you're actually part of the event now.
Yes.
If you can do that, I mean, that's tremendous. It's like being a mediator, between two parties. So the authenticity comes from doing all that work, background checking. Now, I know there are a lot of false profiles. So you also talk to colleagues. Have you heard of this guy who's been posting? So we have a network of journalists internally. So, and they're very experienced journalists, like 20 years, 30 years like me. So ask him, have you heard of this guy who's been posting on Twitter? Is that authentic? Has this guy been posting for a long time? And maybe try to contact that guy itself. Yeah, do a direct message, try and connect with him, follow him, DM him, ask him, cross question him. So then you also begin to see other newspapers now quoting him. And then you begin to get convinced that, yes, this is actually true, it's authentic, and therefore I can go ahead with it.
Yeah.
So we have to stop ourselves short of a Kaspersky story. I think it was a few months back. Somebody would posted something about Kaspersky getting hacked or something, and it was not true. And right enough, next day, somebody posted that this is fake. So fake news, a lot of fake news. There are even deep fakes today. They can make a video of you, Chirag, saying things you never would imagine that you would like to say. Deep fake is a big problem with artificial intelligence coming in. And that's something where we take a lot of due diligence, because see, at the end of the day, it's also your reputation, your newspaper's reputation. You have to be very careful on who you're quoting, what sources.
Yeah.
And that's a service you're providing to your reader. You want to be true to your reader. So we spend a lot of time doing that. Now, even you can do this checking for images also. Reuters taught me that people post screenshots and images of things being hacked, all the traces and so on. If the image is of a very low resolution and it has been resized, that's probably going to be a fake image. But if it's of a high resolution, it tends to be a more original image. Then you can also download the image and look at the EXIF, EXIF. Have you heard of that term? You can use a image editing tool, and you can look at the EXIF. That is the metadata. So the metadata actually gives you the clue of who created the image, and even the geolocation, if his location is on, the geotagging. So that's how you can also check the authenticity of the image. The image credits might be in there somewhere in the metadata.
Yeah.
And even for deep fakes, I imagine, I don't know how it's done yet, but there must be some tools to check for deep fakes. Like, if you remember some years ago, they created this deep fake video of Obama saying something, President Obama, when he was in office. It was hilarious, of course. And it's not the way of just joining clips like they did for President Trump. They made this song on President Trump on YouTube where they joined like 50 clips of his mouth movements, and they made it look like he's singing a song, which is very hilarious. But it's not done that way. This is done using artificial intelligence. It's not joining clips. So AI is something else, for deepfake. So you have, as a journalist, we have to be very, very careful, because everyone is looking for their 15 seconds of fame, and everyone has their motives. And people also want free publicity because the medium is free. Social media is free it's a free for all.
Yeah.
So those are some ways in which we check the authenticity. The best way, of course, is to call the source and talk to him, like my colleague Jeremy has done.
Look, I followed Jeremy's work on the Optus breach, and I specifically actually on LinkedIn said it's been amazing work. I think that was an example to me of what good journalism looks like when it comes to cybersecurity. So I massive shout out to him as well. But look, there's so much in what you just mentioned right now, right? And which is where I say technologies will evolve to help us when it comes to spotting deep fakes or other forms of social engineering, advanced forms. But you cannot replace the human critical thinking, because that is ultimately the line of defense. And that is where, in the past, when I've done talks on deep fakes, on how you shouldn't believe everything you hear, and I think the challenge which we have currently across is people like to kind of be in their echo chambers. They like to talk to people who agree with them. I think that's something that we are losing over time, is a healthy debate of keeping an open mind. And I think that is where people take advantage of that situation, and you have echo chambers that reinforce your view, and you believe that's the right view and everything else wrong. So I think the human critical thinking, where you pause, reflect, is such a powerful thing as we go forward. But it's quite really also helpful for me to understand, I'm sure the listeners too, of what you go through in terms of validating this, because like you said, ultimately it's credibility, it's also your standing, it's also the people who you can impact by potentially wrong reporting. So there's so much that goes on with that. So it's a very very good insight that you've given us. So really appreciate that, Brian. Just that aspect of it was quite enlightening to me. And on that, you kind of answered a part of this question already, but something that comes to my mind, because you did mention the Russia Ukraine situation, and I'll take it. I won't kind of focus specifically on that, but take it kind of a bit broader. Is when you have big ticket items like that, you have that aspect. You have things like massive ransomware attacks. I know you're very passionate about identities, so you see that the changes there, regulations. How do you unpack these big ticket items? How do you approach them? Because initially you mentioned, there are features, there are breaking news, there are different aspects of how you do it. How would you do something like this, which is kind of a combination? It is breaking, but it also needs some deeper insights. How do you piece it together?
Yeah, that again is a really good question, and I'll tell you how it's done. But before that, I just want to talk about, since you mentioned Russia and Ukraine, there is one more source. If you remember, I was talking about the sources where we go to for leads.
Yes.
Yeah, our journalists actually attend the Ukraine press conferences online. We have found a source, and there is a YouTube hint. There's a YouTube channel for that,
Right.
and I think it's called the SSSP, which is the Ukraine Secret Service, and they hold press conferences, but they hold a lot of press conferences. Even when Ukraine grabs regains some territory, there's a press conference. So we pay attention to the ones which are focused on cybersecurity.
Right.
Now that again, one of our journalists went out and found that source. So a journalist has to do that little extra bit to find that news source. Once he attended the press conferences and he registered, he just gets emails every time whenever there's a new press conference. He gets invited. Okay. Now, coming to your question on the big ticket items, look, everyone is covering this news every day. Okay. And the question is, how can we be different? Or the question is, what is it that we want to do at what level? Like you said, there's the breaking news first, and then you eventually get to the longer form content. Okay. For me and for my team, the first thing is to break early. So we have to give the news early as possible. Sometimes we are even ahead of the names I mentioned earlier. Those websites, I mean, we are even before them. So for that, you have to be very in tune with your sources to get your leads on Telegram or wherever. And that's your advantage as a journalist, as a cybersecurity journalist. You know sources where the mainstream journalists don't know those sources. I can bet you a cyber security reporter I won't take the name, in a big newspaper will not know those sources as well as my team does, or I do, because we went out and actually found those sources. So again, we have editorial meetings and internally, and I've also, as an editor of other publications in the past, I have editorial meetings with my team every day or every other day. This is happening. How do we cover it? It happens everywhere, even in the television space. All editorial offices have these meetings. So we first break the news, and then we get together. Okay, what else are we going to do with this story? We're going to contact experts. We're going to contact practitioners. Maybe even try to contact the hacker himself. Maybe even try to contact CISA. And CISA has responded. That is the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency in the US.
Yep.
And they do respond because they know you as your newspaper. They know your publication. So they also check your profile on LinkedIn, and they know they're dealing with real journalists, and they do respond. So we try to get now an exclusivity into the piece, what others have not yet done. So we have already talked about the what and the how in the breaking.
Yeah.
Now we get more towards the analysis, more digging deeper. The why. Why did this happen? Where did it happen? What else can you uncover? It's like a detective going on site and trying to look for more clues. And in cybersecurity, we call that forensics, as you know.
Yes.
So a journalist is also doing that kind of digging around, but we don't actually go on the street. We are talking to people. We are questioning people. Well, can you tell us more? Now, then again, that comes with a caveat, because these days all the cybersecurity vendors want to comment. So we are asked, we get quotes just freely from PR agencies. All the security companies, they hire these PR agencies. Okay, Optus has happened in Australia, so you'll have a security company giving a quote to us, without them, unsolicited, without us even asking. So we have been warned: do not use quotes from uninvolved vendors. They have to be involved. That means, say, if you take Kaspersky was actually involved in the investigation of that event. Then we talk to Kaspersky because they would know the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one checkpoint for us. That is, this is what you should be doing. And then if you see our coverage on Optus on the ISMG website, there was a lot of coverage last week. Okay, so I'll tell you how we broke it out. We have another, my colleague Anna Delaney, who's our video editor, video head of video programming. So she did an interview with Jeremy Kirk. The story behind the story. So Jeremy, how did you go about finding these hackers? How did you go about getting this information? So that was a short 11-minute video. So then another piece of content. Then our social media team, we have a dedicated social media team, did a campaign on that, with the visuals and everything. So then again, something else coming out of that. Yeah. So from our breaking news, you have more content. Then you have a second day lead or a third day lead, where Jeremy did some more digging. Now the story develops. It develops over time. So after a few days, that hacker decided that he's not going to leak any more data. He suddenly decided, for some reason, that he wants to stop doing this. He told my colleague Jeremy that this is wrong. I don't want to do this anymore. So another story comes out of that. So you see, you keep on getting more stories. Now, if you look at it, in the mainstream journalism world, the dailies would cover a front page news with a big headline: war breaks out in Russia strikes Ukraine with nuclear warheads, strategic nuclear warheads. That's a breaking news. After a week, you go to the newsstand, you'll see magazines have done the same story, but it's like 12 pages long. It's more depth. They've got box stories. They've consulted a nuclear scientist. You've got his point of view. They've consulted a war expert, an army general. They've got his point of view. So, the story gets different angles, different point of view, different perspectives. So that's the longer, you have more time to do that. Yeah. You have more days to do that. But the at the top of the stack, you have to have breaking news, which is break it out early, inform your readers as soon as possible. Yeah. Sorry. Now on Digital Create, what I do on my personal blog is I break the story, and then next day some more thought goes into it, more analysis. I've talked to a few more people. I've got some more information. I put updated as the first word in the story. Right. As a footnote, I put updated on so and so date with these inputs. More inputs were added. Okay, so if you see, I think the book review that I did for you recently, Chirag, you produced this very good book, right? On 7, what is it called? The
7 rules to become exceptional at cybersecurity.
Yeah, 7 rules to become exceptional at cybersecurity. I'm still reading it as more information comes. If it doesn't merit another standalone story, there's just more some tidbits of information which has to be added for clarity, or just to expand on what we have said. It becomes an updated story. Yeah. We write updated. So that's how we do it. But of course, a lot of this comes through editorial discussion. It's not just the journalist himself. You have to have a discussion internally about which way the story is going. There's something also called the story angle. We look for a different angle. Okay, all these other websites have already reported about Optus. What is the different angle we can take? Okay, so just to give you an analogy, I also track aviation. So this let's say this 737 Max aircraft crashed. That would be your breaking news. Lion Air or Ethiopian Airlines. You heard of the Malaysian Airlines, the 737 Max incident, right, a few years ago. So that would be a breaking. But the different angle would be another story, like, there was something in the autopilot, the software. The software was made by, on a budget. So they hired super cheap contractors to write that software because that company was on a budget. And therefore, these flaws came into the software. Now, I don't hold anything against the company who manufactures that plane, but that I'm trying to give you an example that would make a different story.
Yeah. So it's
What caused the crash? Caused the crash was faulty software, which made the nose of the plane pitch down, and then the moment it tries to climb too steeply. So that was like faulty software, and that's what caused the crashes of the two aircraft, and then they eventually had to ground the 737 Max. Yeah, so that's, you see how the story's angle is
absolutely. How it evolves. There are different branches that come to it. Now it's just remarkable, and it's just getting. Just while you're speaking, I'm kind of learning a lot in terms of how your kind of mind kind of it takes all these different things, and you can, with all the experience you have, you foresee that there will be branches that will emerge out of the story, even if it's breaking at this point. So it's very, very, very comprehensive. No, thank you for that, Brian. Look, I think respectful of your time. Last question. I'll just kind of talk about this in two different parts, but one I do want to, because I really like the fact that you actually gone out and acquired cyber skills, cyber certifications. So I do want to kind of ask you the question of how are you establishing your credibility amongst the people who you need to engage with, right? Because that's so important. Like they talk to you, like you mentioned, they take your calls, they respond to your emails. So you establish some credibility. So I think I'm going to get that. But also along those lines, as you talk about it, what advice would you give to people who want to do what you're doing, or want to be interviewed by you, and people who you want to kind of put in your trusted sources list? How do they go about that? So two-part question.
Yeah. So in case I forget the other part, I may ask you to repeat that later.
Absolutely.
I'm just caught up in a lot of thoughts. So on a lighter note, in jest, I say people respect me more now because of my gray hair and my glasses. But 20 years ago, I looked like a lot of black hair, like a college kid. I looked almost the same, but except for the gray hair. And then that was the tougher part, gaining people's trust and getting people to believe in you. Today, the human being just looks at you in 8 seconds, has made a judgment already about you.
True.
Yes, so I don't have that problem anymore, at least in terms of physical appearances and physical meetings. It's like immediate respect the moment I walk into the room because of my gray hair. On a lighter note.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But on a more serious note, I have thought about a lot about this. So there are actually two sides to this question. One is for me, and one is for the person I'm interviewing, right? So for myself, really, it's about knowing your topic very well. Because if you know your topic very well, you can make a very engaging back and forth conversation. Now, I've done more than 300 interviews, Chirag, over the last 28 years. Wow. Getting as far even as coming face to face with Michael Dell in the last 2 years. I didn't get a chance to interview him because there are very few interview opportunities. They only want the big newspapers will get those opportunities first. So if you're a blogger or you're working for a less known newspaper, you don't get that opportunity, even though you may know a lot more than the actual newspaper reporter who's doing that interview with Michael Dell. So it really works that way in the industry. But for me personally, it's really about that, knowing your topic very well. And therefore, when I interview anyone, even when I'm being interviewed today for your podcast, I have done a lot of preparation.
Yeah.
So for me, preparation, research, have your notes ready, know your topic really well. Now you immediately get respect after 5 minutes because the guy you're interviewing knows that you know his stuff. I've also been taught that journalists sometimes know more than the guy they're interviewing. And the guy they're interviewing is more nervous than the journalist. In fact, sometimes I over prepare, and then I have to retrace my steps a bit. That's number one. Number two is I do a lot of reading.
Right.
Including reading your books like the one you have sent me. I invest in books, not just cybersecurity books. I read on a whole lot of issues, even people skills, people management skills. It's good to have an all-round knowledge about all these things, so that when you talk to a CEO and he takes off on one tangent, you can keep up with him. Somebody talks about cricket, you can keep up with that conversation. Yes. So you need to know a wide range of issues, not just cybersecurity. Number one. Number two is you need to get that kind of attested. That comes through, why do we go to school? Why do we go to college? Because we need to get that attested. You need to get that certified, as we
Right.
say.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought a few years ago, while all the other journalists are not doing that, I can be a little different by going in for certification. So I have done, as I mentioned, this foundational certification from EC Council. It's called the Certified Secure Computer User. But I'm not just looking at cybersecurity. I'm looking at cloud certifications. So I'm
Right.
next going to do the AWS cloud practitioner. I'm studying that right now, and I want to do the exam and the certification. I've done the IBM cloud certification 2 years ago, but I've also done certification for leadership because at one point of time I had to lead a team of 20 people, millennials to middle-aged people. I found that very difficult. So imagine from a reporter, you now get into a leadership position as the years go by. You have to learn other kind of soft skills and management skills.
Yeah.
So I've done Dale Carnegie training for that. Now, many of these courses are my own investments. So coming to your question again about your advice, and that would be a nice segue into that question. You need to invest in yourself. I tell the youngsters who I meet, many of them walk up to me for advice in this office where I sit. Keep on learning, never stop learning. And learning could mean any form. You could just watch a YouTube video,
Yeah.
read a book on the train. You don't have to read an entire book. Talk to people. Now, when two people are talking like this, a moment back you mentioned about the importance of two people engaging and talking,
Yeah.
because we are learning from each other. Every interview that I do, I'm learning from the other guy, and he's learning about me because I may have said something he didn't know about.
Yeah.
So you got to go out and meet people. So I go to a lot of events. The last 2 years I could not, but now things are opening up. So I'm going to Gartner's IT Expo in Kochi this November because there are going to be a lot of CIOs and digital transformation discussions, and that's what I'm getting into.
Right.
I know I network with a lot of CIOs, fortunately, because I've been the editor. So that adds to your credibility. Your title, your
Yeah.
job title also makes a big difference, especially when it appears on LinkedIn.
Mm.
Okay, you can look at mine. It's like Director Global News Desk. Now, when people see that, they take that really seriously.
Mm.
So you have senior journalists getting those titles, and that kind of helps, rather than just assistant editor or associate
Right.
editor. It makes a big difference when you have those titles. And then, of course, it's your intellect and your knowledge and the way you speak. Those are the very important skills, the soft skills, the way you dress, the way you carry yourself. When you walk into a room, you should be able to take in everyone, the charisma, the way that actor Amitabh Bachchan does. Everyone's like at the edge of the seat watching him.
Yeah.
They're lapping into every word he said. You should have that amount of charisma.
Yeah.
For that, you have to be super confident, and you really have to know your subject matter. You can't wing it, as they say.
No.
You'll get caught somewhere. So now credibility on the other side, when I'm interviewing someone, if someone approaches me for an interview or I'm chasing someone for an interview, I look at their profile on LinkedIn. Now people can also fake it there, but I'm looking for academic credentials. Has he written any books? Has he written any papers? What are his certifications? Has he spoken at events?
Mm.
Is he very widely invited? Has he spoken at Black Hat USA or the RSA conference? Those speakers, get points,
Mm.
and then he makes a good candidate to interview. But if he's more like on the sales or product side,
Mm.
I would kind of avoid such people because somewhere along the line they start pitching.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm looking at someone who's more have a formal business education, more from the business side, and then coming over into cybersecurity, or
Right.
someone from academia, or someone from the research side. So those are the guidelines given to me. Of course, on the vendor side, there are some good people as well. Like you have Sean Duca from Palo Alto Research. He's from the vendor side, but Sean really knows the stuff.
Mm.
If you talk to Sean Duca, and he's not gonna pitch Palo Alto to you when he's talking. He's talking about what are customers talking about, what are the customer challenges today, and how he's helping those customers. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they may even name the customers, and that's what we actually want: referenceable customers.
Yeah.
So that's how we, shortlist people to interview. And I
Yeah.
guess you have done that due diligence for me as well to interview me on this podcast.
Yeah. No, it's to your point, right? I mean, there's just so much there in terms of like one. I like the fact that when you talked about establishing your own credibility, you did the hard yards. I think that's such an important point, and it's inspirational. And I think that's a message I give to everyone, because cybersecurity is currently, in demand, right? So a lot of people are attracted to it, which is great. But I always say, when you approach something, when you get an opportunity, work hard to learn about it. Don't just stay at the surface level. Actually, go deeper, and that requires you to learn things. So you talked about cloud certification. You talked about cyber certifications. It's
I
giving you.
talked about investing. I talked about investing in yourself.
That's a big
Now,
thing.
a lot of people here, journalists, they want the company to pay for their courses.
Hmm.
The company should buy the dictaphone. The company should buy this. The company should buy the green screen. Why should the company buy it? Or I have a separate cameraman.
Yeah.
Why don't as I started traveling, Chirag, I'll just take a few more minutes. As I started traveling around the world and getting invited to conferences by all these vendors, Las Vegas and all these places, used to observe the other journalists, from China, from Korea, South Korea, other regions. And they were like a one-man show. He's tweeting, he's writing his story. He's also got an SLR camera. He's also got a 4K video camera. So he's an all-in-one. He's doing all that. You don't have a separate video crew. Of course, you do need it at some point of time with lights. But if you're a journalist abroad on a conference, you do it all yourself. You can't take your camera guy there. Okay, now you have to invest in yourself, invest in your training, invest in your equipment. I spend a lot of money buying equipment. Today, I buy subscriptions to SoundCloud. I pay for it myself for my platform Digital Create. Yeah. And when you invest, you begin to see the difference in the quality because you're using all these tools. Just going back a few steps, people have told me at press conferences that your questions are really, really deep compared to the other business journalists. Now, why is it that so? Because I read a lot of reports. A report is 100 pages. These technical reports. And I follow a lot of blogs. And I do a lot of reading, a lot of research. So obviously, I'm not going to ask the same set of questions. What is your roadmap? What is your business strategy? What is your revenue like you get from the business journalists? Yeah. My questions are completely thorough and deep. I've been told that many times by the clients and the PR people. And it shows when you make that investment in time and research and equipment and all these tools and studying. So that's my advice, coming to your question, for anyone who wants to come into this field. And I think this will be the final question that you asked me.
I think it's absolutely, the investing in yourself bit is such a powerful point. And in fact, that's something that in my own career, it has helped me. I think nobody is, and I always think you are responsible for your own career. It doesn't matter if you're self-employed, if you work for somebody, it doesn't matter. You are still responsible for your own career, and you need to make those investments. And I really like the point you also brought up about reading and being aware of what's happening and networking people. And actually in my book too, I mentioned this. I called it Art of Differentiating Skills. And to me, networking is not about selling. It's not about just meeting people. It's also about observing, growing, learning. There's so much
exchanging ideas.
Exactly. You expose yourself, because you can get so caught up, no matter how skilled you are in your little lane, and kind of forget rest what's going on. But to your point, the world we live in, cybersecurity has implications in geopolitics. It has implications in economies, implications in investments, implications for the stock market. So you need to understand so many facets. So if you want to be a leader, if you want to be an authority in the field, all of this is essential to it. So I really like those points. I mean, and I could talk to you, Brian, for another 2 hours and wouldn't get tired, but I want to be respectful of the time. You've already given me a lot of time, and to our listeners. So I just want to say massive thanks. I've learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners would have learned a lot. And just having somebody with your experience, with the lessons you learned along the way, sharing that so openly, a lot of gratitude for doing that. So thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll continue our conversations. And there are, this is not the end of it, but I really want to say thank you. Much appreciated.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be here, Chirag. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. And I wish you all the best. I look forward to your next book. When is it coming along?
It's all about continuous growth, right? So I want to keep, if it's books, if it's speaking, if it's learning new topics, is something that I'm always keen on. Like just in closing, we'll release this episode. But very soon I'm speaking at a major conference here in Melbourne. and really the theme of that is thinking about our mindset, our mental health, our well-being when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think that's an area which is of deep fascination to me as well. I like to learn about domains that are not just cyber, but impact all of us. So hopefully on topics like that, I'm sure our paths will cross again, Brian. So
Yeah,
thanks again.
you're welcome.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you.